Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Hard Knocks, the after show presented by Porsche. I'm J.B. Long, joined by my friend and colleague, Sarina Morales. Thank you for joining us after the latest powerful episode of Hard Knocks, one that focused a lot on social justice efforts across the National Football League and with your Los Angeles Rams. And Sarina, tonight we're going to talk in detail about those topics with some great guests who have been wonderful to the Rams.
For sure. Rams head coach Sean McVay will actually be joining us in just a little bit to be part of this meaningful dialogue. But first, to get things started, we'd like to welcome in a former Pro Bowl safety, NFL analyst for ESPN, who has shared his thoughts, his wisdom, and his heart with all of us during these trying times, Ryan Clark. And he's an actor, a comedian, and quite possibly the biggest Rams fan I know, Taran Killam. Thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah, good evening to you both. And gentlemen, to me, this was Hard Knocks at its finest, taking us behind the curtain to get to know the men and the human stories and the struggles they all experience. And unfortunately, we're going through even more of them in this summer of 2020. Perhaps we can start with you, Ryan, and that opening scene where Sean McVay is, reacting to the video, the shooting of Jacob Blake with Rams Senior Director of Communications artist on his side. How did that hit you as a former professional athlete, as a Black man, as a father?
Well, I think, it's not necessarily, watching Sean that made it hit me. It was watching it myself and understanding that it was Jacob Blake and that it was a new video, that it was a new shooting, but feeling like I'd seen it so many times, feeling like I'd cried over it so many times, feeling like I've explained it so many times. I've talked to different people about what that particular shooting made me feel so many times, but it had just happened. So it was a feeling of exhaustion, a feeling of disappointment, a feeling of sadness, which quickly turns to a feeling of anger. And I think but when looking at Sean, who's someone I know personally, someone I admire, I have a lot of love for, it was his genuine disgust with what he was watching that actually gave me hope. It was him actually having an emotional reaction to watching someone that didn't look like him, someone that he may not necessarily identify with, being shot in the back 7 times. And when you see something like that, it makes you say, you know what? Maybe people do get it. Maybe people are aware. Now people are starting to feel it. And what was a tough moment to watch on TV was in some way something encouraging, because I saw someone that didn't look like me having empathy for someone that does look like me.
Yeah, Ryan, to your point, I wrote this quote down from Cooper Kupp where he said, if you still aren't feeling this, right, you're just choosing not to. Taran, as an ally, I know you've been very vocal on your social media. What are your thoughts on tonight's episode and being a huge Rams fan and seeing the leader of the Rams, being affected, what the Rams have been doing so far this season?
Yeah, this week's been awful. It's just this year's been awful. This week's been awful. I was happy is the wrong word, but I was somehow comforted to see this episode reflect the world and reflect how I think so many humans are feeling. But listening to Ryan speak, the word hope, I'm heartened that he felt hope, because this has been a week just personally for me where I've felt a real absence of hope, where there's so much strife, there's so many challenges, and there's such an important conversation happening towards humanity, towards seeing each other as humans and giving each other just that equal respect. Like that feels like common sense to me. And the fact that it's such a battle, and then you have such a corrupt, morally absent failure of humanity in Wisconsin there in that video. I don't know how you go back to a documentary about football practice without addressing it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It is interesting that, at least with the Rams context, this became a reality they had to wrangle with in the context of practice, whether or not to practice. And Ryan, as you know, some teams around the NFL and around professional sports chose to take their services away to use their platform to amplify their message. The Rams did not. And I think this episode gave me some insight through the words of Robert Woods and others as to why they chose not to. And in some ways made their choice to practice just as powerful as the choices of other entities that did not.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a correct way to address this other than to make sure that it is addressed, to find actionable items, to understand where you can actually educate and also make a difference. And the one thing that I think players have to understand, and it seemed like Rob understood it, was, locally is where it starts. So many times we look at the top, but when you think about certain councils and you think about certain political offices that are held in Los Angeles, that's where the Los Angeles Rams can make a difference. And you heard him talk about maybe speak to different police forces, speaking to different politicians. And I think that is where we are now moving towards, right? You look at what the Baltimore Ravens put out as a statement. You see what the NBA did inside the bubble as they try to move forward. And I don't think that you can look at a team that didn't practice and say that that's the only way to do it, or look at a team that did practice and say that they're wrong. It's all about the heart of those men, the way those men decide to move forward as a team, because in the end, when I'm listening to Andrew Whitworth speak, who, he's a Tiger, he's someone I'm close to, I'm looking at someone I know to be an ally. I'm looking at someone I know to treat us all as humans. I'm looking at someone that grew up in the locker room where 80% of the people don't look like him. And he's having that conversation. He's feeling that conversation. And that's what football teams are. They're together. So if you make that decision to practice together, but move forward and do things to serve the community, do things to make a change, that's just as powerful as not practicing.
Yeah, Taran, knowing that you have a huge platform yourself and seeing guys like a Robert Woods say, look, unless we're going to get a bunch of buses and go down to Inglewood or somewhere in LA to do something, this is the platform we're using. What are your thoughts on the Rams using their platform to make change that may not be, not practicing that day?
I'm in full support of it. I'm in full support of anything that brings empathy and reason to this conversation, because the world seems absent of that right now. Stepping outside of this year, which is such a challenging year, I've always been very proud of the Rams organization and their contributions to the community. Speaking of Andrew Whitworth, the way that, he's donating, I think it was something 50 or 100 bicycles to public school. The Rams do a great job. I find, as a fan, of ingratiating themselves to the community. But I think it's just, I'm struggling. I'm struggling how you don't have empathy, how you don't go into these moments and just say, how would I feel in that situation, on both sides? If I'm Jacob and I'm frustrated, I'm trying to break up a fight and I'm not being heard, I'm furious. And if I'm the police officer, which is a difficult position that I never want to be in, but if the actions that took place were like, I can't conceive of it, but if I try to, I wouldn't forgive myself. I would be vocal. I have failed. I have failed as a human, and help me face the responsibility of this failure. And the fact that there's any kind of sneaking around or not revealing, it's maddening. It is infuriating. It goes from sadness to anger so fast. So thank goodness for organizations, and thank goodness for allies, and thank goodness for teams who can rally together and go, no, we do see each other, we do love each other, and we're coming from love, and we're coming from optimism and respect, and promoting that in the world.
We're on the eve of a new season, and when you think of how far the NFL has evolved on these matters, and empowering players to take their stance and to use their voice on these matters, to me, it's staggering. And I think the argument can be made that it's happened really quickly. I think the argument could be just as fairly made that it's taken too long to get to this point. But as we prepare for the 2020 games on the field, it seems inevitable that this is going to be at the forefront of every single kickoff. How does that make you feel, either of you? And how should we as viewers approach the season ahead in this context?
I'll go first there if Taran doesn't mind. I think so. When I watch the NBA, I want you guys to think of the last time you actually remember the conversation, or the conversation about the pregame demonstration actually registered to you. You can go back to very early in the restart of the bubble. You can obviously go back to the Orlando Magic and them having one player stand. You can go to Miles Leonard. You can go to Greg Popovich, and you can remember the first time somebody stood, or the first time everybody wasn't a part of it. But eventually, it became the norm. You got used to it. And I try not to use the word hijack, because I understand what these organizations and what these leagues are doing. They're trying to show support, right? But the reason we talked about Colin Kaepernick the way we did for so long was because it was a protest, because it wasn't encouraged, because it wasn't allowed. Now these will be organized demonstrations. These will be what the powers that be say, you know what, guys, go ahead. You can do it. And I think initially people will notice. I think initially people will see the togetherness, and eventually it'll get to the point where it's just like everybody standing for the national anthem. I believe what has begun to happen is we have started to change symbols, and what we can't do as athletes, what we can't do as former athletes, as Black people, as white people who are allies, who are supporters, who want to walk with us in this fight, is we can't get confused with symbols and systems, right? If we get blinded by pulling down Confederate symbols, pulling down symbols of racism, but the system isn't changing, then we aren't moving forward. We aren't winning. And so I expect there to be demonstrations. I expect some form of quote unquote protest, but that's all window dressing right now. They can sing every Black national anthem that they want. But if you look into their suites, and the people that the owners are aligned with are people who don't see Black people as human, who don't see Black people as equals, who see Black peoples who are protesting as SOBs, because we saw that in 2016, then we're in the same place. We cannot get confused by the window dressing. And many times we do that. And I think even in the NBA, when you look at the boycott, they found, yeah, the symbols have changed, but the system's the same. And I think that's what we definitely have to pay attention to. What is truly going on with the NFL, with its owners, with its executive, and with its players outside of the demonstrations that we see.
Taran, before we let you go, do you just want to have any final thoughts on being a fan of the NFL and what you'd like to see be done on the NFL's behalf moving forward?
I've loved football my whole life. I've loved watching the NFL. It's a favorite tradition of mine, and that's really what it is that it's a tradition and a pastime. And for me, at the heart of it, it's a game, right? And at times it can feel like the most important kind of game in the world, but at the end of the day, it is a game. And so, what everything Ryan's saying is just so on the mark, in that trying to enjoy a game in this time when the real world stakes are so much more important is tricky. I hope that people can find comfort, and I hope that people can find entertainment and enjoyment, however this season plays out in the games. And part of what I love about sports in general, and particularly football, is the camaraderie, is coming together, right? We need to come together. And so I will look to football for that. but in, but in terms of my expectations of the season, of the year, there's just bigger things happening right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know how you cheer for these players and don't also support the things that they are fighting for. So Taran,
you must.
Appreciate your time and your insight, and always cheering for the Rams. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I loved his backdrop there, and can't wait to welcome him and all of you to SoFi Stadium as well. Ryan staying with us, Sarina, J.B. on this evening following episode 4 of Hard Knocks, and joining our conversation is the head coach of your Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay, to give his perspective. We saw a lot of it throughout this episode on HBO, but as some time has passed, we look forward to getting his latest thoughts. And Sean, my big takeaway tonight is I'm just so proud of the organization, from the leadership down through the coaches, the staff, the players. You've often talked fondly of the leadership council and the roles those men fill in your locker room. To see it firsthand in a moment like this, what did it mean to you as you tried to bring everyone, put your arm around everyone and make sure that their needs and their hopes were met?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those deals it's an ongoing thing. And this isn't something that's new that's been going on. I think there's just a heightened awareness on it. And like I've talked about for the last few months, this has really been about listening and learning more than anything. I'm continuing to gain insight. There's a lot of different things that don't necessarily have answers on, where healing needs to take place and solution needs to take place. And I think that's the thing that we're working through. You want to be able to have actions that are in alignment with moving the needle in the right direction, but there's so many layers to it. And you want to take action, but you don't want to be impulsive, and you want to make sure that whatever you decide to do is representative and reflective of what these guys are talking about, what's important to them. And it's a lot. It's way bigger than football, and it's something that, unfortunately isn't new. There's just a heightened awareness on it. And, you're glad that it seems like there's more urgency, but it's pretty sickening when I really learn about a lot of these guys' stories. And like I've said, it's about asking the right questions.
Sean, before you jumped on, and I know that you and Ryan Clark have a great relationship.
Still looking smooth, man.
My guy. What's up, brother?
But Ryan, Sean, Ryan had great things to say about you, obviously, but more, I think there was a comfort from all of us to know, as the head coach of the Rams, that you were affected as much as a Ryan Clark and some of the black and brown players that play for the Rams. Why? I mean, the two of you come from an NFL background. It's difficult to see why the family that is the NFL and each team does not represent what we're seeing on the other side.
Yeah. You want to go ahead, Ryan?
Yeah, I got it. I think the thing that helps us, and the reason we can be this way, is because when you grow up the way we did, you get education. You get an opportunity to understand that humans are just that. They're humans. The fact that Sean is white and he comes from a different background, but we can get together in the locker room and have a conversation, and in that conversation, see the vulnerable sides of each other, see each other hurt, see each other grow, be happy for one another. It makes you change your opinion on people. It makes you change your opinion on what the world is. And I was talking to somebody after my son had an encounter at Whataburger where he was called a racial slur. And I remember crying. I cried on ESPN because of my locker room experiences, because of the great coaches I had coming up that were white. I always taught him, you know what? It's about the heart of the person. It's not about the color of the skin. And I made him comfortable in that. And he felt that was going to be the world, but that's just the locker room. And so what we have to learn to do is educate people, right? Sean was talking about asking the right questions and figuring out how to move forward. If we as Black people educate ourselves on our history, we understand why we are where we are and how we can move the needle forward. And I also feel that if white Americans educate themselves on African American history, they know about the layers that Sean was talking about. See, police brutality is a symptom of the bigger illness, and the bigger illness is in the institutional and systemic racism. And I think that's what Robert Woods was talking about. That's what Sean is talking about when he's saying make the right decisions to move forward. It's so deep, it's so layered. But when you listen to that council talk, and the thing that stuck out to me was Sean said, this is the time for me to listen. He doesn't understand. He's saying that because that's his heart, but he doesn't understand what that means to a Black man who's just seen another Black man be shot in front of his children 7 times in the back. To have another man, to have a white man not say, I'm going to tell you what to think, but to say, I want to hear you. Those words, to say you're going to listen, are more powerful than you could ever expect or know.
No, Ryan said it perfectly. You know, it's just, there's something so special about sports that brings a bunch of different people together, and you really get a chance to break down, unfortunately, the stereotypes that exist in our society and our country. And in a lot of instances, that's why I said sports has been such a blessing to me, because I've been growing up, I've been taught to love people, but I've also been around so many different people that have been so influential in my life, of different racial backgrounds, you know, different things that they've experienced. So in a lot of ways, it's made me naive, because I've been so fortunate to have that exposure. And if you really felt like, hey, if the locker room was reflective of our country, you'd like to think that we'd be in a lot better place. That's what's beautiful about sports. But what I think has also been brought to the forefront with a lot of our conversations is we've got such great men of different experiences. But when you do leave the building, there's a life that these guys have that's different than sometimes what you're exposed to. And that understanding and that willingness for guys to share is what's really been as impactful on me. And like Ryan said, it's about listening. And I've had so many great men in this organization, whether it be players, coaches, that have continued to educate and enlighten me and help gain a perspective. And that's why I think, especially from our players, our coaches, you want to act, but there's a lot of things where you're saying, all right, let's make sure it's not just because that's the right thing to do right now, and because it makes the Rams look good to release a statement. Yeah. And now it's because you get chastised if you don't, you know, and that's what I don't want us to fall into. I know that I've heard that from our players. It's like, what are the things that really are going to actually make a difference, that is about where your heart is, as opposed to what the PR thing is to do right now?
Sean, this is not a question that's meant to pivot towards football in any intangible way, but I do know how strongly you feel about the bonds in your locker room and the chemistry and the results that it can have in terms of results on the field. Where do you feel like your group is, the 2020 Rams, with game day fast approaching?
Yeah, I think we're in a good place. I think there's a lot of things going on that you don't want to ignore, because it all goes hand in hand. You know, for guys to be able to feel like, all right, we're just going to brush these things aside and focus on football, that certainly isn't the approach that we want to be able to take. So it's that, you know, you're finding that balance of, all right, how do you make sure that you're addressing the things that are way bigger, while also knowing that we do have to get ready and we want to put out a good performance. And I think it's listening. I think it's making sure that we're in tune with guys, because it hits a chord with different guys in different ways. And that's the one thing that, you know, and I don't know, I didn't see the show. I've seen some bits and pieces of it, but I don't know if they put it in there when you're talking about, you know, we as coaches are so programmed to have solutions to everything, you know, and it's like, all right, if there's a problem, like I always talk to people about, don't give me excuses, give me a solution. Let's fix it. This is not one of those situations that's that easy. And that's where it goes against everything that you're accustomed to, because what do you do as a coach? Your job is to solve problems, figure out solutions, and then you go attack and execute a game plan. Well, figuring out how many different ways, what is the game plan? What are we trying to do as a Rams to make a difference, is where I'm not going to pretend I have those answers right now. But I think the collaboration amongst listening to our guys and what we feel like is going to be the right thing will hopefully continue to bring clarity on an extremely heavy and layered full situation.
Brian, for maybe both of you, how do you balance? What would you do to recommend for a team? Hey, we've got to play football. We also have to worry about what's going on in the streets every day and all those videos that didn't take place. How do you balance that, Ryan?
I would say this. Most of the greatest football players are great compartmentalizers, right? They find ways to focus on the job and the task at hand when it's time to do that. Now, this is a completely different situation. And, and we've been here before, but now it's affecting organizations in different ways because of the awareness, because of how much we now understand that we clearly, or at least didn't want to accept 4 years ago. I think in watching the Chargers and watching the Rams, the thing that I loved was going to the guys and saying, what do you want to do? It's about ownership. If you give them ownership over their decisions, if Robert Woods and Andrew Whitworth say, you know what, coach, I don't think today is the day to practice, then you don't do it. But when they say, look, coach, if we're not going to drive buses down and we're not going to go talk to the PD, if we're not going to do certain things, practicing would be the better choice. Now those guys have ownership over that. And they understand that's 2.5 hours, that's 2 hours. I know Sean's pretty progressive. Y'all might practice 45 minutes, but it's going to be so efficient and so crisp, it's going to get done. But if you can go out and do those things and those guys understand, you let me make the decision, coach. You valued my opinion. My feelings are important to you. And so now I'm going to give this back to you. I'm going to give this back to my team by focusing on playing. And then, obviously, as Sean mentioned, when you walk away from the field, there's life to live. And those guys have to go focus on that. But I think the greatest of teams, the greatest of football players have been going through things and simultaneously playing good football because they understand how important it was to perform and they prepared that way.
Yeah.
Sean, I know you're in charge of a group of 80 players specifically, but one of my favorite parts of this episode was seeing the likes of Jock McClendon and Artis Twyman, people we know who are so valuable members of your facility and help you navigate the day-to-day, but also the completely unexpected and tragic in times like these. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of them over the years.
Yeah, no, that's the thing that I think you get some good insight is how many different people are instrumental in getting yourself in alignment with, all right, how do we figure out the best way to navigate through these uncharted waters and help guys heal, help find solutions. You mentioned Jock and Artis. They've been outstanding. I've leaned on them so heavily throughout this, as with Reggie Scott, so many members of our coaching staff. And it's all about that collaboration and continuing to have that better understanding. But I think Ryan said it best, and that's the message that I've kind of gotten from our players is that, there's an element of using the platform in a way to demonstrate, all right, what is right about, the sports atmosphere and environment, guys coming together. And then how do you figure out how do we use that in a way that is in alignment with moving the needle in the right direction with things that, help people feel like there's progress being made, and it's not just something that is for show. And that's the thing that when I think you really listen to our guys over the last couple of days, there's a lot of different things that are representations of good acts, but does it truly change some of the deep-rooted issues as to why we're talking here? When you start talking about the economics and a lot of the things that are involved with the systemic issues that Ryan was talking about. And I think that's where our guys want to really be able to put a game plan together that attacks some of those problems. And then hopefully these solutions or some of these action plans are in alignment with sustainability over time, as opposed to just a quick fix that looks good or just being able to do something that makes it seem good. But it's like if you're sick and you're just putting a Kleenex on a runny nose, but you're not really giving yourself the medicine to heal the real issue.
You said it, collaboration, and this has been a great collaboration here. Sean, I really appreciate your time. I know, Ryan, you as well. You're both so busy. I can see Sean is still at work right now. So thank you so much for both of your time in this conversation.
I will say this. Have a great night. This is the one thing I'll leave you guys with, though, because this will forever remain with me. This guy means so much to me for a lot of reasons, but when people need you the most are when those people really come through, the all-time people, as opposed to just the people that are there at good times. I'll never forget my first year as a coordinator. It was a 4-12 season. One of the most impactful things that happened to me that year was a veteran Pro Bowl experienced player coming into my office, feeling that I was in a tough spot and giving me some encouragement that helped me really sustain. I'll never forget that, and I'll forever be grateful to you for that, Ryan. I love you for that.
I appreciate you, Coach. I love you, brother.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
All right.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you both of your time.
Yep.
And also to Taran Killam for being with us earlier in the show. If you did miss any part of episode 4 of Hard Knocks, obviously we cannot recommend it highly enough. The most impactful one of the season for me. Make sure you catch the West Coast airing if you'd like to watch it again. If you haven't had time to digest it yet, tonight, 10 p.m. HBO or HBO Max. And the Rams have a ton of great content leading up to the season opener against the Cowboys in prime time on Sunday, September the 13th. We will have a 53-man roster analysis show. Kickoff for charity on Sunday night will be streaming live, and lots of content around the official opening of SoFi Stadium. So make sure you check all that out and more on the Rams platforms over the next couple of weeks. Sarina, great to see you, and I appreciate the dialogue and for including me in this conversation.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.